across the hall. So it's a little packed now, but I'm just letting you guys know there will be an overflow room. So if we do get more in attendance, just they'll be starting in about 5 more minutes, and then Angela Henry's going to start things off, like I said before, in about 5 minutes. Then we'll introduce our speakers, and they'll go from there. Okay.
Thank you.
You are the herd. I am a herd. I brought a herd. Yeah. Oh, there you go.
You guys living in town?
We didn't move back
You weren't around at all.
No, I was in Garden City probably. Remember when Trump got shot? No matter who it is. A lot of people just think it's going to be publicity stuff. Yeah, they did, yeah. There's somebody laying on a building, previously laying on a building. Yeah. This was before the shooting took place. It was like, you know, like laying flat, and just somebody with their phone or whatever.
So I was assuming.
Yeah, cool guys.
Stand up above.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn off the light real quick. I'll turn it back on. Hold on. It's okay. You can't see.
In September of 1969, the small Kansas farming town of Iola was rocked with the news that a waitress working the overnight shift at the Dine Out Cafe was missing. While the town was fervently searching for the waitress, another family across town would wake up and find out that their teenage daughter had not made it home from the junior high football game. This mystery has haunted this peaceful town for the last 53 years. In a town this small, there's no way the two crimes are not connected.
I don't think they're connected. Completely different motives, completely different method of attack.
Two murders in the same week, a few days apart, in Iola, Kansas, back in '69. There's a connection.
Listen to Bodies in the Bayous present Season 4, Iola, Eroding Justice. Listen to these cold cases that leave you with more questions than answers.
Good evening. I have a couple of housekeeping things I need to do first, and then I'll introduce our speakers. So we have a sign-in sheet for the Historical Society out in front by the cookies and the lemonade, so you can get a cookie and lemonade and you can sign in for us as well. We also have a current newsletter, and there are membership forms out there if you would like to join the Allen County Historical Society. We also have brochures that tells about the Historical Society itself. And then we also have, this is new to the Historical Society, this is through the SEK Alliance of Museums, and it is a passport, and you can go visit different museums just like the Allen County Historical Society that's in here. And you can pick these up either, I believe, from Curtis, or you can pick them up at the museum. So we have those. The housekeeping out the door and to your left is the bathroom, and I believe the ladies' restroom is not working, so there's a men's restroom. You can go in there. There's 2 stalls in there as well. We'd like to thank the Allen County Historical Society the Allen County Community College for letting us have our program here and for hosting this evening, and then also for our speakers coming. So with that, let me introduce our speakers. 24 years ago this summer, I went to Leadville, Colorado for a month to volunteer with the restoration of the historic Tabor Opera House. And on the first day that I was there, I met Gretchen Scanlon, one of our guest speakers this evening, and we became lifelong friends. Since that time, Gretchen has moved to the Galveston, Texas area, and she met Morgan Kelly. So in July of 2021, Gretchen and Morgan created the podcast, Bodies in the Bayou. The podcast features unsolved crimes, primarily giving voice to the victims. And they also encourage the movement of these unsolved cases for both the victims and the victims' families through their investigation and their research. So this evening, they are going to give you some excerpts from their fourth. Oh, I don't have the number. I'm so sorry. Oh, this used to be in the round. Did anybody? Did you? Oh, okay.
We heard.
How's that? Did everybody hear so far what I said? Okay. So they're going to give you a preview, some excerpts from their season 4, Iola, Eroding Justice, the unsolved murders of Iolans Betty Cantrell and Sally Hutton, as well as a preview of their 5th season, which will be launching in early August, which is Shadow in the Windmills, the disappearance of local area resident Don Sager. So please help me welcome Gretchen Scanlon and Morgan Kelly to the stage.
Hi, thank you so much for coming tonight. We are very excited to be here. I'm Gretchen.
I'm Morgan. Thank you guys for being here tonight and letting us present these cases to you. We're super passionate about what we are going to be presenting tonight.
A warning, tonight's presentation goes into 2 brutal murders, abuse, possible sexual assault, and other extremely sensitive topics. Keep that in mind and take care of yourself while listening. It is okay at any point in time if you need to leave the room.
The opinions expressed tonight are just our opinions. They do not at any time express the opinions of the Allen County Historical Society. So Gretchen, the question that we get the most is, how did we get started?
Well, we worked together, and then we bonded over our interest in true crime. We would go to work, and we would say, have you heard about this case, or have you heard about that case? And then we got into the podcasts. And so we would listen to the podcast on our way to work, and then we'd run in and say, oh my gosh, Morgan, did you listen to this? And we would do our own mini investigations of what we were hearing.
Absolutely. And this is at the point where I suggested to you, like, let's make our own podcast.
And I totally said no. Let's not.
And I'm like, why not? We can totally do this. It'd be easy. We can do it right from our phones.
And I was like, nope, big no.
Until the next day.
I came back and I said, okay, let's do this. But absolutely no serial killers.
Yeah, and so our first 3 seasons are on nothing but serial killers. Bodies in the Bayou was born, and we get the question, like, how did the name come up? And I'm pretty sure it was me. She might dispute that.
I'm pretty sure it was me. But we had a lot to learn. Our first season, I think I skipped something there.
It's all right, just go right into the first season. We'll be all right.
Our first season, we started with the Texas Killing Fields, and we were passionate about this area as the Texas Killing Fields are where we are currently living. So between where we work and the field where we basically drive by every day, 4 victims were found in that field, and 2 victims disappeared from the gas station near there.
So with that, we kind of started this podcast with this season in our studio that we thought was going to be so easy, because we heard from other podcasters that we follow that you can do it right from your closet.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, until you find out that paneling in a laundry room creates a lot of echo.
And we were also told that we could do it from our phone. So imagine the 2 of us standing around with a tiny little microphone on our phone trying to record a podcast. But that's how the first episode went.
And yet we didn't know how to edit at that point, so we're just like straight running it, and I'm pretty sure that's how you got laryngitis.
The second episode we re-recorded so many times that I couldn't speak by the end of it. So if you're listening to us, please skip our second episode.
Maybe 3 or 4. That's kind of how we introduce it too. We're just like, skip like the first few to start with like maybe the 5th. But when we got to the Texas Killing Fields, we were just so astonished by how many names of young women were on this list. When we kind of started looking into that, I think it was like the 11, the 11 that they said. We started doing research, and it got to be so many. We started with this butcher paper of a timeline. We had things kind of like posted on it, and at one point we had to extend it, right?
Yeah, at one point we had to add an extension to it. We would have this timeline across, we would taste about articles and pictures, but it got so heavy that it fell off the wall. So this gives you an idea of just a few of the people that were murdered in that area.
And this is just who's been identified. So our next I'm sorry, I don't always speak into a microphone, so I'm going to try my best. Our next season, a dear friend of ours, Jesus, asked us, how come it is that podcasters, or you guys even, only cover women? Were there not men that went missing in the Texas Killing Fields? So we said, we'll find out.
As it so happened, a few years before women began to be targeted in the Texas Killing Fields, in the same surrounding area, law enforcement was dealing with a large amount of runaway boys from the same neighborhood, and actually many of them from the same school.
And it's really sad, though, because when this is happening in this neighborhood and with these young boys, law enforcement often just labels them as runaways right off the bat. And with that being the label given, there's not always the investigation done to find out what has happened to them. And
some of these kids disappeared going to the pool in their bathing suits.
Yeah, and if they had just given a little bit more time into finding out maybe the reasoning behind it, it could have prevented so many other young boys from being on this list.
Yeah. It was not until the shooting death of Dean Corll that the horror of what was happening unfolded.
I'm not sure where we are on this list right here, so let me see. Well, and he had the 2 teenage kid accomplices too, which was very crazy, because he had the teenage accomplices so brainwashed that they're bringing in their own friends, their own like siblings of brothers that they've grown up with into this kind of sick world.
This season was probably the most difficult for us to get through. So the horror of what happened here was really tragic, and so it was very difficult to get through. But the next season, we actually returned to the Texas Killing Fields, and the reason that we did that is there were so many updates with the technology and how the technology was changing. We had victims that had previously been unidentified, now being identified through genetic genealogy. And so we felt like it was time to go back. We also had victims who hadn't made it on the list, and so we really wanted to cover them. And one of the cases that we covered was the cases of Kimberly Blissett, and that was probably our most successful case because we were able to contact law enforcement in that case and make them aware of that case. Even though it was in their jurisdiction, it had really fallen off the radar, and so they weren't looking into it. But the cold case detective said he would take a look at it, and when he did, he found that the DNA in that case had never been tested. And at this point, currently right now, that DNA has been sent into a lab and is being tested. But not only through that, we were able to contact Kimberly's daughter and give her a voice to talk about her mom. And through that, we were also able to get her in contact with the detective who was currently working on her case, and she had never heard from a detective ever in her mom's case. So that was a big deal for us.
It definitely was a big deal, and it just sounds all too familiar, even when we're talking about the 2 cases that we're presenting tonight, is this has happened to the families. The families of the victims are still surviving, but they're not hearing back from law enforcement.
Right. So, and although there is a federal law that law enforcement needs to be in contact with victims of a crime at least once a year, that is currently not happening, even in the cases that we will be talking about tonight.
So, this has been quite the adventure, you know. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we got here, kind of how the podcast has come to life, and what we've done along the way. You want me to start? So we're kind of doing like a grassroots promoting. We've been to several festivals and what would you call them?
Podcast promotional festivals. We went to CrimeCon in Las Vegas. We attended True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival in Austin, and then we have attended the Obsess Fest in Dallas.
So when we attended the True Crime Festival and Paranormal Podcast, festival, is when we actually had the opportunity to present the cases of Betty Cantrell and Sally Hutton. So it was the first time we were able to really put it out there on, I guess, a bigger scale, like more people being able to see the cases of this small town, other than just the people who are living in this small town. Get there.
That's a little technical difficulty there.
Oh, I love this story. So how did we get here, Gretchen?
So we came for a wedding. You may recognize her. And
some really, really great lodging.
Yeah, we had some really great lodging. And we did what all out-of-town wedding guests do. We went after the wedding to eat the cake.
And it is over this delicious cake that you, Scout, so graciously provided us with, that we've learned about, I don't know, some case that happened before Angela was born, but we found out maybe he was out there,
Yeah, so at the cake eating ceremony, I guess, the topic turned to the Sally Hutton case. And there weren't a whole lot of details, but in those details, we were hooked. And we had decided that season 4 would be born.
And we had enough time, the 14-hour ride home, to completely start our investigation, even with spotty Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we spent all 14 hours researching and talking about this case.
So, I guess let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to do some reading on this one. I have not quite memorized this entire slide that Gretchen gave me. So the year was 1969, and it was turbulent times. We have the Vietnam War and the veterans coming back and kind of, protesting the draft. And you have the recovery of the assassination of Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy from the year before. But also that year, you have the first man landing on the moon and walking it, which is a happy time. And then you have this big festival that's known as Woodstock. Anybody here attend it? No? Nobody? Okay. But it was outside of Bethel, New York. But yet, in this small town of Iola, you have 2 young women who lost their lives. And that's why we're there tonight.
On September 30th, 1969, Betty Cantrell, a 28-year-old married mother raising 2 children, worked the overnight shift at the Dine Out Cafe at 106 North Jefferson Street so that she could be at home with the children during the day while her husband, David, worked as a mechanic at Dale Wichman Ford. David made an adequate salary to support the family at the time. David and Betty had been married for 5 years, and they lived in a small, modest house at 821 North Street. David and Betty had just discussed that night before Betty quitting her job, but regardless, Betty got up for work, put on her light green waitress uniform, the shirt dress type, with the buttons on the front bust and the short sleeves, arriving for work around 2. The diner was an American-style food cafe, a place where you could get meatloaf, a hamburger and fries, chicken fried steak, and a slice of pie. Betty would act as both cook and waitress for most of her shift. There would be another employee arriving later that morning, but it was a passing by police officer that was doing his rounds that said he saw her in the cafe around 4:45. Betty was sitting at a small 2-top table listening to her small portable transistor radio as usual. When the owner's son, Philip, began his short walk about 2 blocks, 4 minutes from the cafe, as he did most days, when he got close, he noticed that the sign was closed and that Betty's car was not there. Assuming that something must have happened and she would have locked the door, he realized that he did not have his keys, so he returned and walked back home to 303 North Sycamore. He got his keys, and his mother, Ethel, returned with him. They discovered that the door was unlocked, and although the lights were off, walking in immediately noticed what appeared to be blood droplets. Betty was nowhere to be found, and at the table where she usually sat, there were 2 coffee cups, one with lipstick and one without. It was then that they noticed the cash drawer was open and the money was missing. Ethel called the police, and an officer arrived at the cafe. They noticed that there was blood in several places around the cafe. A tissue with blood on it found on the ground outside near where Betty's car was usually parked. Betty's car was missing, and the police reported to the media that there was $25 missing from the register. Police Chief Everett Shepard said that the amount of blood found in the cafe was only that you would expect from a small cut to the finger. Police left the cafe to try to locate Betty, and upon leaving, informed Ethel, get this place cleaned up. People are going to want their pancakes.
As crazy as that sounds, that's exactly how it happened. So at this point in our investigation, in our research and doing the podcast, we had some questions that we had to ask. At the time of the disappearance, the question of the original reporting of Philip going to work that morning would have been 5 a.m. What we do know during the trial is he stated it was closer to 6. So when the original investigation was happening, they're assuming that this brutal crime had happened within a 15-minute window, but at trial, it opens it up to being over an hour. So yes, more can be done within an hour than it can be within 15 minutes. The other questions that we have to look at are, where are the coffee cups? Did they go back into service? Were they kept for evidence? Were there fingerprints? You know, we have one with lipstick, so we're assuming that's Betty's, but who might have been the other companion having coffee with her that day? And then they're saying there's just enough amount of blood for a small cut on a finger, yet there's enough blood to leave fingerprints, handprints on walls. How does that even make sense? So we have to do a further investigation into that and the Kleenexes, because that's being wiped, used to wipe up that blood.
As we began our research, a basic picture of Betty emerged. Mrs. Cantrell, as she was always referred to in earlier reports, was a 28-year-old married wife and mother of 2, the least likely person to go abducted. It took a lot of research to find out more about her and find anyone who knew her. It turned out that she was far more complicated than a wife and a mother of 2. Betty Lou Moore was born on February 5th, 1941, to parents Raymond and Ketra, who went by the name Peggy. Raymond was a farmer, and the family lived in Mantor, Kansas, before moving to Iola, where Peggy had family as she grew up in Carlisle. Betty went to high school in Iola before getting married, and Betty had one sister, Jean Moore, who married John Ornelas. She was a small woman. She was only 4 foot 9 inches tall. She only weighed 130 pounds, and all of her life she was pretty much known by her short pixie haircut and her cat-eye glasses. Betty and David had 2 children living with them, Robert, who was 6, and Sherry, who was 10. That afternoon, word made its way around to Mrs. Bill Burlington, who lived in the house near the end of South First Street. On her way to run errands, she had spotted a car at the end of the block of Rock Street and First Street. It was partly hidden by bushes. At first, seeing it did not seem that strange. It wasn't until she heard about Betty that she became concerned, so she reported it to the police. The police soon arrived, and the car indeed was Betty Cantrell's 1959 Ford Fairloin, turquoise. It had been driven across the railroad tracks, and when they opened the door, they noticed that the bloodstains in the car and near the car, there were keys in the ignition, but it was determined that it was drivable. And also, the keys to the Dine Out Cafe were found on the dashboard. Police announced that they searched the soft ground around the area, and they did not find any footprints. It did not appear that there had been a struggle in the car or in the diner. A KBI agent would describe Betty as a quiet, reserved person with no known enemies or marital problems, and although they suspected foul play in her disappearance, he noted that Betty's husband, David, was not a suspect in her disappearance, and nor was her ex-husband.
So I'm going to stop you right there just for a second, kind of interject, because it's just what I do. So what we do know at this point is it's kind of crazy how they can just rule out David, right?
This is less than 24 hours after she goes missing that the KBI is announcing that her husband is not in any way a suspect. And they have never announced publicly why that decision was made. And anybody who watches 2020, 60 Minutes, Dateline, anything, or listens to true crime podcasts knows the husband is always the first suspect.
Yes. And I guess that's one of our questions that we always ask ourselves throughout this case is, you know, they've ruled him out so early on, and even after just this week with the, you know, Facebook Lives and stuff that have been going on, we've had people reaching out to us saying, my mother was friends with Betty Cantrell and knows for a fact that she was in an abusive relationship with David. So why is he ruled out so early? Is it because he was a mechanic for Dale Richmond Ford, who was known to service the law enforcement's vehicles? I'm a conspiracy theorist, so here I am. You know, it just irks me. Gretchen might have a different opinion there, but
well, you do always have to ask yourself what exactly is going on here.
Yeah.
You know, why are we not looking a little bit deeper at what is happening? Is, at this point, are police looking at Betty possibly as being a runaway wife? Maybe she took the money and ran away, you know, and left her car and her child and all of her items behind. And so it does have you wondering what exactly is the thought process here.
By law enforcement, it's like, why would she do that? Why would she leave her kids? For one, why would she leave her kids behind? Right, so.
And this is the one thing I will tell you, we do not say anything bad about the search that happened, because this was an incredible search that happened for Betty. So you're looking at over 500 residents that showed up to search that field. One airplane circled for over 5 hours. Several boats searched Elm Creek. There were flyers hung up in town, flyers sent out to nearby towns. There were newspaper articles on her disappearance. The Fish and Game got involved in probing the Elm Creek to look there. And so we really had to ask ourselves, when this search happens, what else do you have that's leading them to that area? And it is a day later that law enforcement announced that they did find an earring that had been torn from Betty's ear, a shoe that was in the mud on the banks of Elm Creek, and also blood on rocks near Elm Creek. So I forgot to tell you, so pretty much we're pretty sure that they were looking at this area for Betty's body.
At least by day 2, I mean, they come out and say it pretty much. Yeah.
On Friday, October 3rd, 1969 at 12:30 p.m., a body of a woman was found a mile north of Country Club by the members of the Harold Gay family. She was partly in the grass and partly in the ditch. The body was that of a woman who had been beaten so severely in the head that her features were unrecognizable. The woman was dressed in brown jeans and a black sweater and appeared to have dark hair. Dr. George Tatar said that the woman had only been dead for 10 to 15 hours. At first, everyone believed that they had found the body of Betty Cantrell. But soon, officers began to believe that they probably hadn't. The realization and the horror that they had a body of another woman began to sink in. And when David Cantrell was brought out to identify the body at 3:30 p.m., it was at this time that he said, "This is not Betty." On the roadway, the police also found bloody cleaning tissues, an empty box of cleaning tissues, and what at the time they referred to as a base to a jack. The family was later told that it was possibly the jack that had been used as the murder weapon.
So at this point, we know the shock had to be real to this community. When we visited Iola looking into these cases, we drove out to the location where this body was found, and we could not help but think to ourselves, why is she all the way out here? There's nothing out here. It is here where the question really lies and starts to kind of linger. Are these cases connected? One thing, well, a couple things actually. You have the timing. In the same week, you have this going on in a town that never has anything like this. You have the bloody tissues that are at both crime scenes, and they're both young females. What is happening in this tight-knit community, guys, in this 1 week?
It was within a few hours that police in Iola would hear from Elsie and Ray Hutton that their 14-year-old daughter, Sally Hutton, had gone to the junior high school football game the night before and had not returned home. Law enforcement quickly knew that they had discovered the body of Sally Hutton.
It was a very warm Kansas day, October the 2nd, when Sally decided to attend the junior high school football game at Riverside Park, and it was reported that she had left the house around 5 p.m. The Iola Ponies were playing against Fort Scott. She was supposed to meet her cousin Jeannie at the corner of Jefferson, and they would walk to the game together. Jeannie, her cousin, was her Aunt Pat Beaver's daughter, and she lived on South Walnut. Apparently, she never met up with Jeannie. She just returned home. Jeannie returned home. It did not seem that they thought anything about it at the time when they didn't meet up. And at first, Sally's parents thought she had simply just stayed the night there. They didn't even think about the miscommunication. It wasn't until Sally didn't show up for class on Friday and the school had contacted them that they knew something was wrong. Ray and Elsie began to call and go by relatives' homes, first going to their sister's home and looking for her, and then contacting friends and cousins. Elsie's family began to look for her, including at her grandparents' house. She was reported missing a few hours after her body had been found. It would be the question, even 54 years later, was she really at the football game that night?
And that's certainly the question that we had to ask ourselves. So you have to start digging through different accounts of what people said at the time. And it was really Principal Elmer Frizzill's saying that he had seen her at the game and had thought that it was unusual, as Sally wasn't normally at the football game. And then it was the account of the Reader sisters who said that they had offered her a ride that night and that they had seen her at the game.
So what we do know as time passes, especially this amount of time, is our memories start to fade, and the recollection of what we think we might know, we start filling in the gaps. And where people were like, yeah, you know, I remember offering her a ride, or this happened, it's sometimes hard because they didn't come forward at the time to really know if that is fact or if that's just us filling in the time gaps. And that is nothing to really be ashamed of or like mad about or any of that, but it just happens. We all do it. You know, the story becomes grandiose, right? And so what we have to do in investigating is narrow that down. And as far as we're concerned in this investigation, we believe that Sally was at the game that night.
Yeah. Sally Hutton was born on March 4th, 1955, to parents Elsie and Ray Hutton. When she was born, she joined her sisters Brenda and Carolyn. They grew up in the small town of Gass, and for many years, until 1965, then the family moved to Iola. Sally's family on the Hutton side had family in Gass that dates back for generations, and some still live there today. The Hutton family was a very large family with lots of cousins, grandparents, nieces, and nephews everywhere, and so there was always some place for her to go. 14-year-old Sally was a junior high school student in the 9th grade. Sally's sisters, Brenda and Carolyn, describe her as a shy teenager who would cry at the drop of the hat. Her cousin described her as a reserved girl who did not often go out, but they said she loved boys, clothes, and music. She loved to sit and have her hair combed. She had dreams of becoming a truck driver in order to see the world. She lived with her parents Ray and Elsie at 309 South Kentucky. Sally's father worked for the brickyards but had retired due to illness, so the family scraped by on Ray's very small pension.
So when we met with Carolyn, one of my favorite stories that she told us about her sister Sally was that she liked to collect the bottle tops, you know, the ones that we get on the Coke cans, and she would string them together like garland and put it up in her room as decorations. And she also liked to like collect odd and ends, like rocks that she thought was really cool, and she put them around her room. And you know, even after her passing, her mother left her room like that for a while, and her mother truly believed that whoever did this to Sally must have been involved with Betty as well. So again, we go back to that lingering question, are these cases connected?
The same night that Betty's body was found, about 5:30 p.m., Jimmy Maloney, out for a motorcycle ride, went over the Kentucky Street Bridge. He looked over and noticed a body floating in Elm Creek. Betty was still fully dressed in her waitress uniform. Her body had been in the water for several days, and she was severely decomposed. She was positively identified by her husband David by the jewelry she was wearing.
So at this point, rumors start to circulate around town about why Betty's body was not found earlier, especially with the massive search that was going on. And they assumed that her body must have been weighted down by rocks because they're out there searching with the boats, game and fish, and they're probing, and yet they don't find her. What we do know is because Betty was drowned, she's going to sink. This is what we found out after we've talked to many people in our field and investigators, and you know, what we do know is that once they sink from drowning, they may not resurface for 3 days or longer. And even though that might be the rumor around town, we truly don't believe that she was weighted down by rocks at all.
Evidence at the Kentucky Street Bridge indicated to law enforcement that Betty had been in a fight for her life. The earring that was torn from her ear, the rock that had been used to hit her in the head and that forced her in the water, shows that she was not incapacitated and taken into the river. From the point, it is believed that her body floated a short distance downstream to where it was discovered.
So we did go to this area to further understand what had happened when we first started this investigation, and it is private property now. So as we're down there kind of probing around, and we had friends that took the brave trip down there, it's not accessible. It's really not. And so you're having to take a body down there that's dead weight kind of at that time. It's pretty far. It's not easy. And as we're down there, sorry if you're in the room, yes, we were on your private property. Forgive us now. But we were out there for a mission. And, you know, it's really not easy when you're kind of in the trenches, so to speak.
Don't worry, he quickly showed up to tell us that we were on his property.
I told you that was going to happen, by the way. Okay, so this is what we can conclude from the autopsy. So we put a few bullet points up here. I'll briefly run through it. Neither woman was sexually assaulted, which makes you wonder what is the motive behind these brutal crimes. Betty's autopsy clearly tells a story of a woman who was in fight for her life. Although little is released about Sally's, it is clear from the injury that she sustained that this person was very aggressive, very angry, not happy with what was going on in the moment. In starting the research for the podcast, we requested the case files from the KBI, Iola Police Department, Allen County Sheriff's Department, and the Allen County Courts. We have continuously requested these documents, and they have been denied.
The Iowa Police Department actually told us that we could have the documents for Betty's case, but they said as long as we would get permission from the KBI. So we contacted KBI and said, hey, the Iowa Police Department says we can look at these case records. Is that okay with you? And they said, we have no jurisdiction over the Iowa Police Department. They can do whatever they want with their records. And so we went back to the Iowa Police Department. We said, hey, we'd like to look at Betty's records. Like you said, we could.
And they told us we have to get permission.
They said the KBI would actually have to write a letter saying, yes, bodies in the bayous can have permission. And I'm like, but they told you they can't do that.
We have an email.
So it was like playing whack-a-mole. And although we are very grateful to the Allen County courts for the records that we received from them, it was very interesting to find out how much of the records in these cases are missing. In Betty's case, the entire trial transcript is missing.
They also won't release Betty's case files, even though it is considered closed, because they still consider it to be investigative materials, but they don't specify to what. And in my personal opinion, I just feel like if you're not going to give them to us, then do something with them. Or turn them over, or give it to the public. It's time. It is time.
When we started the podcast, and we had many people reach out to us and tell us that they thought that there was something involved from law enforcement, some possible payoff, or a list.
I love the list.
A list
of
of untouchable people in Iola. And the entire time, I would say to Morgan, no, I don't think that happened.
It totally happened, Gretchen. I'm sorry.
No, I don't think that happened. But she would always say to me, every single time that we had some denial or something like this happen, she would say,
they're on the list. I'm telling you, they're on the list.
And then she would say, well, the trial transcripts are missing. Now what do you say? And I'd be like, I don't know, just poor bookkeeping. So,
yeah.
She loves a conspiracy.
But they can be true. They can be true.
They can.
I mean, and if you're not questioning it, then you have nothing.
So one of the things that comes out is that Sally consumed a hamburger and fries hours before her death. And repeatedly from law enforcement, we are told that this came out of the second autopsy that Sally was given. Okay, so this is very difficult because that is not possible. Sally's stomach contents would not have been able to be examined after she had been buried and then exhumed. This had to come out of the first autopsy. Law enforcement had to have known about this prior because it came from the first autopsy. It's just not scientifically possible. We asked a ton of people about this in the forensic science field, and all of them said you have to think about what happens to a body when it's buried, and that her stomach contents had to come from here. And
but we did have to question, because this is one of those moments where you and I are having this discussion, and I'm like, are you sure she was embalmed, right? Because we have to go down that rabbit hole, and it's not without cause. if they're coming out and saying that this is because her stomach contents were there in the second autopsy, it might be possible, but not likely. Not likely.
Not possible.
Still possible. Conspiracy theory.
This is how research goes every day. I'm like, it's not possible, and she's like, maybe. I'm like, no, it's not
epic
scientifically possible. But one of the things that law enforcement will tell you is that they did not have the ability to ask anybody at any local restaurant whether or not Sally was there that night because they didn't have the timing. That it was too late after it came out in her second autopsy what she had consumed. And that she had consumed a hamburger and fries, probably from Sonic.
And why is it from Sonic, Gretchen? Is it because they serve tater tots?
So this is how research goes. When this comes up, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out whether or not Sonic served fries in 1969 or just tater tots. So that's kind of how podcasting goes. You have to trace down all of these different little things. They did serve fries. But the reason that we think law enforcement is probably focused on the fact that the hamburger and fries came from Sonic is the fact that a lot of the local teens would do the turn around the square and end up at Sonic, which makes you think that Sally was probably on a date. But also, apparently, according to our forensic science people who said that they may have known because of the fries. There was a distinctive difference between different places and what type of fries they served back then. And so that would be one of the ways that they could have visually figured out where she had eaten. But the other reason that we've been told by law enforcement is that the only place that was opened and available for her to get a hamburger and fries at that time of night was actually Sonic. So we've done a little bit of research on that also. And these are all the other places that we found that were open with a hamburger and fries.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we're going to move on next to Lauren Duffield. And you're probably asking, who is Lauren Duffield? Well, it was about 8 o'clock one night when Gretchen called me and she literally says to me, "You are not going to believe this. I cannot make this shit up." My interests are completely piqued because 8 o'clock is really late for Gretchen. Anybody that knows her, that's like beyond her bedtime. Okay, I've barely had dinner. She's in bed. But she tells me Betty's ex-husband was on death row for killing a babysitter.
It was through trying to build the family trees on Ancestry that gave us the first clue that Betty's life was not as simple as she had first appeared, although it was never mentioned at the time of her going missing or the time of her death. While Betty was attending high school, she met Lauren Duffield while he was attending Iola Junior College. Apparently this college right here. Betty and Lauren married on October 4th, 1958. Lauren would follow his brother Leslie by enlisting in the Navy. Lauren was stationed at Norfolk, Virginia, and they welcomed their first child, Robert Neal, on February 18, 1962. Lauren was a crewman on the Neptune patrol bombers, working as an aviator in the electronics tech. Everything seemed normal until March 5th, 1963, when the neighborhood was abuzz hearing that 14-year-old Gwendolyn Constant Pageant, a Virginia Beach teen, had disappeared while on a babysitting job. The next day, Lauren Duffield came into the police station and reported that he had been assaulted and robbed. He had scrapes all over his face, his hands, and he said that he was not going to report the incident, but his wife convinced him to come in. He told the sergeant that he had been driving around, and when he saw a man lying on the side of the road, he got out, attending to help him. He leaned over to help the injured man, and the man grabbed him and assaulted him and beat him up. And then he took his wallet, took $4 out of his wallet, and threw the wallet back down. The officer laughed and accused him of concocting the story in order to hide an affair from his wife. Duffield said that the officers were right and he was sorry to have wasted their time. The chief of the Norfolk detectives reviewed all reports that had come in that evening. Looking at Lauren's case, he noticed that there was a resemblance to the man who had taken the babysitter. Officers then went to Lauren's house and took him to the station. They put him in a lineup, and in a move that would not be okay today, Major, the brother of Constance, said he could not identify anybody in the lineup. So they asked Lauren to go back into the bathroom, change his clothes to the clothes he had worn that night, and then they put him back in the lineup. And Major looked and said, "Yep, that's him. That's the man that took my sister." After that, Lauren was taken into the room and questioned for several hours by a handful of officers. He confessed and admitted that he was the man in the car that night that had kidnapped, raped, and later strangled Connie. He admitted to stealing the car and picking her up, and even going as far as to act the crime out to police. He then led police to Connie's body, where she was discovered naked, wearing only a cross.
So, you can see where my interest was piqued when she was telling me this, because it is an eerie resemblance of what has happened to Sally. And I quickly questioned and started going down this rabbit hole too of, did he have a brother? Did he have a great friend? Is there an accomplice? Is there somebody out there who might have been his partner in crime, so to speak, that might have done something like this to Sally?
It was researching the case and trying to figure out who Betty Cantrell was and who David Cantrell was and who else was in their lives that could give us any information about them, that we noticed that David Cantrell had placed ads in the early 1960s before his marriage to Betty, asking for assistance for a housekeeper to help him raise 2 young girls. This got us wondering, who are these 2 girls? What happened to them? What were their lives like? So it started to us investigate David before he married Betty. And then we noticed in David's obituary, it mentions that he had 1 living daughter and 1 deceased. So we thought, oh, we've got it. That must be her. But then further research, we were able to locate that David had married Kathleen, and she had died in 1961. And David and Kathleen had a daughter, Paula, who had also died the same day that she was born. When Kathleen died, she had 2 daughters, Laura and Sherry. There was no mention of Laura in David's obituary or any mention of her at all when Betty died. So what happened to Laura? So we began to research what happened to Laura, and it took a little time and a little digging, and using the best research tool that we have available in modern day, Facebook. We were able to contact Laura, and believe me, I can tell you, she was pretty surprised to hear from us. As we started talking and building a relationship with Laura, the things that she wound up telling us, some of them we pretty much figured, and others of them would surprise us.
So we're going to bulletproof sort of the story that she told us in her letter. David and Kathleen's marriage wasn't a happy one. David was not her father, although he did claim that he adopted her because he came in her life when she was 3 years old. She does believe that David had a hand in killing her mother, Kathleen. She wasn't sure if it was because of the amount of pills that he gave her, or if it was just the lack of response in trying to get her some medical attention. But she was pretty sure that he kind of had a sinister hand in that. Laura was only 6 at the time, so she can't really remember exactly what happened. You know, your memories at that age aren't the greatest. And she does know that at the time of her mother's death, Sherry, was just a baby. After her mother died, David told people again that he adopted her and would not let her to go live with her own family members, including her grandmother. He would keep her away from them, isolating her. She also knows that David wasn't faithful in that marriage. He liked to chase women and have relations with the women that babysat for him. David had friends in law enforcement, which we've talked about before, and he definitely met law enforcement working on their vehicles, so she didn't know if they were just kind of being a good old pal to him. And after her mother's death, David began abusing Laura. So much so, at the time, Betty took her to the doctor to find out if that abuse was normal.
So Betty worked because David would not allow her to buy things for Robert. And so she worked in order to buy them. And Laura also told us that Betty worked so that she could send money back to Lauren in prison. Betty and David fought all the time, and he had made her quit several other jobs. When Lauren was finally able to leave, she went to live with her grandmother. And she married, and she had children, and she had a happy life, but she was always haunted by her childhood. She does believe that David had a hand in killing Betty. Robert, who we also were able to contact, didn't have much memory of his mother, and he was told that the man who had killed his mother had died in prison. Police received a disturbance call on October 14th, 1969, about 3 p.m. from Mrs. Reader Sanders at 628 South Kentucky. She operated a beauty shop out of her home, and when a drunk man came up to her and asked to use the phone, Rita was upset and did not allow him to come in. Joseph Jack Shoemaker was picked up 5 blocks away. Jack was not unknown to law enforcement. He had a lengthy criminal record. They took him to jail, put him on a drunk hold, and he got very agitated and wanted to talk to the sheriff. Soon began to make comments about the Betty Cantrell murder, and that got officers' attention. At first, Jack denied murdering Betty, but officers bought him a bottle of vodka, and as the evening went on, he became more talkative, and he confessed that he had been drinking that night, finished the bottle of vodka, went over to the restaurant where another person was in the cafe, and when the man left, went in and Betty was at her table, and he hit her in the mouth and knocked her backwards and out. He said that he hit her with his left hand, and in his right hand he held a sugar, but he did not hit her with it. He also stated that he hit her in the stomach with the end of the butcher knife. He drug her outside, put her in her car, and at that point he showed an injury on his knuckle, and he said that happened at the time. He went back inside, nicely turned off the lights and the close sign. He didn't want anybody to come in and think they could get their pancakes. He took the butcher knife, the radio, and then he decided to grab some money out of the register.
So it's so funny too, as we were working just on this presentation, I look at Gretchen and I'm like, what's the deal with the sugar? I mean, seriously, he's holding the sugar but doesn't hit her with it. Why is that even in the confession at that point? Like, it's just weird.
So then he's got Betty in the car and he drives down Kentucky, where he parks the car, he gets Betty out, he picked up a rock, put it inside his sock, and then he began hitting her with it. He drug her into the creek, pushed her down, put a large amount of rocks on top of her. Then he got out of the river, soaking wet, got back in Betty's car, and he drove around town for a little while until he ended up at the Neosha River Bridge, where he decided to get out again and deposit the radio and Betty's glasses and a few other items. And then he drove back down to exactly where he left Betty's body pretty much and parked the car, got out, and walked home.
All the while, they're starting to search for Betty. He has time to go and do all of this and supposedly drive all around town and miraculously pull all of this off.
He was drunk.
Yeah, of course he was. What is kind of crazy about this is this information actually does not match what we later find out. she lost the earring in a fight, and apparently he's forced her into the river. You know, he's just nicely waited to gather her stuff when he's got her planted in the car, you know, all that really great stuff. So, yeah, this is a fun confession right here.
Shoemaker's legal team did make a motion to dismiss the confession against him on a basis that the confession was obtained without due process. They stated that Shoemaker could not have voluntarily agreed to waive his rights as he was drunk at the time. The judge said, "We will allow the jury to decide." The trial was held on July 22nd, 1971. The jury was composed of 10 men and 2 women. The prosecutor began with opening statements stating that Jack Shoemaker confessed to killing Betty Cantrell, and in his confession, he knew things that only the killer would know. There were 3 things that he knew that the public did not. There was change left in the register. There were 2 coffee cups on the table. One had lipstick on it and one did not. And that 3 rocks were put on top of Betty's body when it was discovered. And this was the evidence against Shoemaker. No fingerprints, no blood droplets, no eyewitnesses. The prosecution's case consists of a timeline when he calls Philip Ekstrom, David to testify that Betty had no enemies and put the autopsy results up. Then the defense began to put on their case on July 26, 1971. In their statement, they began to attack the confession by making their client, pointing out that the prosecution claims that only Shoemaker could have known these things were actually false, that everyone in town knew. He pointed out that Shoemaker was at home during the time and had an alibi, his mother. He put his mother on the stand, who testified that Shoemaker could not have gotten out of her home without her little tiny yappy dog making a racket. And then he also put Grace Newell on the stand to testify. She was Etta's roommate, and she testified that the screen door was creaky, and she would have heard it if he had gone out.
Well, and we do know that Shoemaker is a known drunk around town, so we're pretty sure he has left that back porch, even if he's sleeping out there, to at least go and search for some more alcohol or get into something rowdy, because he was known to be a nuisance around town. So, you know, regardless of the dog or his mother hearing, you know, he's going to know his sneaky ways to go do what he wants to do, right?
But we did have neighbors come forward and tell us that the dog was very yappy.
They did.
Then they start talking about the fact that there was a large bloody handprint that was never preserved by police, and that Ethel was told that she could just clean it up. They also talked about Mrs. Cantrell's items that were missing from the cafe, and that there was no knife missing from the cafe. And they put the owner of the cafe up to testify that there was never a knife missing from the cafe. And actually, I've worked in food service a lot. We all know where our knives are, so I do believe her on that one. Bob Lane testified that he drove by the cafe at 4:45 a.m. and that he saw that the lights were on and the car was parked out front. But something didn't seem right to him, so he stopped by the police department to tell them. Dr. Myers, who occasionally Shoemaker worked for, testified that Shoemaker would lie about anything, especially when he was drunk, and he was sometimes in a daze when talking. But one tidbit that he did say is that Shoemaker did not have a license to drive a vehicle, and even when working on the farm, would refuse to drive the pickup truck that was there. But we did find out that Shoemaker had been charged in California with grand larceny, car theft. So I do
he's
think
known
he
to drive a car.
He did drive
Steal
a car.
them. Who knows what else?
But the rocks, the dreaded rocks. The biggest thing about the rocks is this is probably the one that would cause the most controversy, is whether or not there were rocks on top of Buddy's body at the time that her body was discovered. Since it was floating, I'm guessing no. But it was David Yoakum, the funeral home owner, that testified that he and his son were there to transport Betty's body and that there were no rocks on her body. No rocks recovered at all. But there were other locals, including Bob from the Iola Register, who also testified that he knew the story of the rocks, and it was all over town. And he also knew that there was change left in the register. Yeah, I lost my place.
Yeah, I lost my place too.
On July 29th, 1971, after deliberating only 6 hours and 45 minutes, the jury found Shoemaker not guilty.
So this is the part I love the most, you guys, is it's so surprising because during this time period, nobody knew about false confessions, right? Do y'all know what false confessions are now? Are y'all familiar with it? You started to hear a little bit more about it, right? This jury could see through what was going on here. They're trying to have him, Shoemaker, confess to a narrative that we know is false. They're saying the knife is missing. He's confessed to this, but later we know there's no missing knife. So it's incredible that this jury in that time period could see through that and say something doesn't fit, this is not right, he did not do this. Try him again.
With Shoemaker's acquittal, the one thing that you're not hearing anything about is Sally. Who can forget the murder of a 14-year-old child? But let us not forget that the KBI promised not to leave town and not to leave this case until this case was solved. So for so many years, her case went dark. Let's take a moment to remember.
Thank you for that. As all of you in this room may know, that her sisters have wrote endless letters years after years after years begging for answers, even reaching out to Unsolved Mysteries, other broadcasts, just to garner some attention in her case. How many letters do they have to write? How many years do they have to wait? How many family members do they have to bury without any answers in Sally's case? It is through her sister's letters and pleas that people finally start to come forward and bring information into the light about what happened. And we were able to use some of that into this investigation of this brutal, senseless murder of a 14-year-old.
Sally only has one sister left, and although time has gone by and she has had the joy of raising her own family and seeing her grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow, it is still there like yesterday. Her heart still breaks. You can feel it when you interview her. You can feel Sally trying to lead you to the answers. We walked in and everything that she had was laid out in hopes that maybe we could be the answer. You would not believe the enormous accountability that gave us, that we would feel in order to do justice for Sally and for her family.
In going through the documents that Carolyn would give us, we found what we like to call the Glenda letter. And this is about her car and a missing jack. The letter had us looking into her boyfriend, who also happened to actually be charged with a brutal murder. But with her letter and other letters, we began to look into other accounts of people coming forward with information about Sally getting into a car that night with a load full of boys at that football game. It was also the account of 3 sisters who gave the family a description of a car at that said football game. We also spent hours looking into 2 very bizarre phone calls from quote-unquote burner phones that came through to Carolyn's home about Sally possibly being set up by a gang of boys. These phone calls perplexed us, to say the very least, And who would go through the trouble of buying burner phones, making these phone calls, if they truly didn't have something to do with this? If you know something and you're not involved, why would you try to hide it? The KBI and the law enforcement would tell Carolyn there was no way for them to trace these phone calls. But we know that this was not members of some organized crime unit that have come up to do with this. So they're very sporadic. They're acting on that whim. And when we interviewed former Sheriff Tom Williams, he confirmed that the police were looking to several young men that had similar vehicles to the one described in these letters. There were also a letter that came from a woman who was a teenager at the time that lived by Sally that said that she heard a car with a loud muffler sound that night, but her parents wouldn't let her come forward at the time to report it. However, it wasn't until recently with an interview with Sheriff Brian Murphy that we were shocked to find out that the Sheriff's Department actually had gathered oil samples from that time, and we're trying to attempt to compare those samples to maybe samples from a suspect that had a similar vehicle. And we also found out from that same interview that not only do they have the base, but they have the actual jack. And this is how he describes it, the actual jack. We're shocked at that point. We're like, what? Because we've done a lot of research about this jack, a jack base, and now we have to go back in and research about a jack.
Our dedication to understanding this case has no boundaries.
This is true. So I remember this day, this picture right here in the middle. This is in front of my house, and my fiance comes home, and he's like, "Oh my God, what are y'all doing?" He's like, "Who is this guy? Y'all gonna get murdered trying to find a murderer, you know?"
We posted an ad on Facebook asking for somebody with a late model Chevy Malibu to come by and show us his jack.
We videoed the entire thing, and he's just like mind blown. But I'm sure he was tired of answering our questions because he's a car guy. So then he's like, "Well, I don't know. Let's take a gander."
We felt like we needed to have an idea of what this looked like. We felt like we needed to take a look at this jack and see if there were any identifying features that could be used on this. What we found out is, and by the way, at this point in time, we're looking at the jack base.
Yeah, and you can see, and she's going to talk about this in just a second. You see that AA over there? When we took these pictures, we didn't know about this.
Yeah. So we were looking at the jack base for quite a long period of time, trying to figure out if that jack base could be identified as belonging to a specific make or model of car. What we did find out is that jack bases around that time period could be identified as possibly going to a Ford or a Chevy type car. And so we thought, all right, that gets you a little closer to identifying a type of vehicle that could have been used in this homicide. But then when we found out through Sharon Brian Murphy that they actually had the jack itself, well, then we did a bunch more research, a lot of it on eBay. But we found out that these jacks can actually, a good portion of them can be identified to the make and model of the vehicle that they came out of it. Some of that has to do with the patent number, and then some of it has to do with the AAA here on the side. But then also on these jacks, on several of them, especially some Chevys, there is a date marker on some of the rivets. So yes, we're not looking at the actual jack that they have in evidence, but what we're saying is that more needs to be done on this jack to see what can be done.
You know what? Just for a second, like, what's interesting about that too is we kind of looked at it like, I was like, okay, I want to see inside of this car. I want to see if Sally was in a car load of boys in a car just like that, how easy would it be for her to get out? Not that easy.
Yeah.
Not that easy.
We didn't get in the back. It wouldn't have been that easy for us to get in there.
Or graceful.
So we were truly starting to believe that these crimes could not possibly be connected, that Betty Cantrell's murder and the murder of Sally Hutton were just tragic circumstance. But when we interviewed Sheriff Murphy, he told us that recent renovations at the sports center building, there was blood discovered. So the KBI served a warrant in the Sally Hutton case and went in and took samples. Although yet to our knowledge, and to his apparently, there is no information on what they found, but still we were pulled back into that lingering question. Are these two cases connected? It is that corner, that street, that keeps pulling us back in. It is where everything started in 1969, where Betty was sitting at the table with her coffee, listening to her radio, where Sally was meeting her cousin. Or did it start earlier? Betty's and Sally's cases, can they be connected to something that happened at that same spot 2 years and 8 months earlier? On Tuesday, December 22nd, 1969, when Dwayne McCannon drove...
1966.
Oh, 1966. Yeah. Sorry about that. I should read right off the list.
No, I just don't want to get it confused.
Drove to the parking lot of the Sports Center pool hall in search of his father-in-law, who had not been seen or heard from all day. His wife was getting worried. When he drove up, he found his father-in-law's car sitting in the parking lot with the family dog inside. He looked everywhere and could not find Kenneth Paul Wright. So finally he walked over to the police station and filed a missing persons report. And the police thought that White would certainly show up. It was not until the next day that they went to the sports center and removed White's car from the parking lot. It was in removing the car that they discovered 3 bullet holes in it. Now they became very concerned, and they spread out and searched the area. It was in a small framed tin building across the alley from the parking lot, where they found a rifle, 1904 Winchester rifle, and a hole where a person laid in wait for White or someone else. Police would arrest Herbert Ayton, who was found in possession with a large amount of cash that he could not explain where he had gotten. He was also found with White's wallet and keys. Witnesses said that the rifle found in the building belonged to him, and Ayton was charged with robbery and grand larceny. Later, the robbery charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. He was convicted of grand larceny and sentenced to no more than 5 years in prison. The search for White went on for years, and law enforcement searched several bodies of water multiple times, abandoned wells all over Allen County. White has never been seen again, and his remains have never been discovered. 7 years after he went missing, his wife declared him dead. This is a necessary step to take care of his estate. However, it was an unintended consequence, and the Iola Police Department is no longer looking for him. When asking him why he is not listed on the missing persons database, they have replied, because he's dead. It is frustrating, as his remains could have been found somewhere else, but not linked to this case. Sadly, no one is looking for him. Only law enforcement can list him on the missing person Name Us database, and we are still urging them to do so.
Just an interesting kind of side note here. A 10, it's a 10, right? Or 8. This is one of those names that we're always like, it's an 8 or a 10. And Shoemaker actually had the same lawyer, so small time. My pages were starting to fall off the podium. Okay, guys, so when we're looking into these cases being 54 years old, we often look at solving the cases through modern eyes and modern technology. But we have to remember what resources were actually available to law enforcement back in 1969.
Like fingerprints.
Bare minimum, standard practice. It seems that we have been very critical in some of the missteps taken in not only Betty's case but Sally's as well. but those basic tools weren't being used.
So we know the Iola Police Department still maintains evidence in Betty's case that could be examined and looked at. We know that they consider her case closed, so why not open it up to the public to look at that?
Why hide behind it being investigative materials when you're not linking it to something being investigated?
And nothing more, no better reason is to tell those out-of-town podcasters that the Iola Police Department was right all along. It's okay, we'll apologize later. In the recent interview with Sheriff Brian Murphy, we were encouraged to find out that the evidence in Sally's case is still stored at the Allen County Sheriff's Office, and he promised to send it away for DNA testing. What he said he would send away was her bra and underwear. Our biggest question is, if Sally was not sexually assaulted, why are we still treating this case as if it was a sexual assault case?
Why not test everything in evidence?
We asked him if it was because of funding, and he told us no.
Nope.
It was not, because we told him we were sure that the Iola community would help him with the funding to get the evidence tested, and that we would help raise that money. But he said, nope, they had enough money to get it tested. We asked him about the jack, and he said he didn't think that it could be linked to anything. Why are we not releasing information for the public and asking their for help? For their help? There are only 2 cases in Allen County. Does a 14-year-old child not deserve to have everything you could possibly do? So
can these cases be solved? We, in our opinions, believe they can be. Test the evidence. Open up the files. Find the files. Do something, please. We are urging you. We're urging you as a community not to let this be forgotten. Let's work together. Let's push. Let's push it forward.
we're hoping that you guys can do that, because remember, we leave town. We have to go back and clean up after a hurricane. That slide was
You
supposed
gotta
to
go back.
Yeah.
Go back. So the next segment of tonight's presentation, we're going to give you a sneak peek into season 5.
It's not on this
Why not? Why not, Gretchen?
one. Because I forgot to save it on the flash drive one.
Okay, so can we grab the computer and make that happen?
Yeah.
Okay. So while she's doing that, I will give you sort of a basic rundown. So season 5, we're going to be putting out in early August. We're going to give you a sneak peek tonight, but it is the missing persons case on Dawn Sager. Have you guys heard about Dawn Sager? Y'all can remember that? So again, we're looking at a 40-plus-year-old case here. We've been contacted by the family to move forward, bring some attention to it. We've been here talking to many of you guys that are out here today. And we're really trying to bring the attention. His daughter Pam is here with us tonight, and we just want to thank her for attending and letting us have this opportunity to present. And Gretchen is going to find that for you any second now. While she's working on that, anybody have any questions? I hear a lot of whispering. Nobody has a question? Season 5. So probably in the next couple weeks, and we just have to go home, kind of figure out some stuff, recollect. But we're shooting for like that social media in August. Yes. I don't think I can move this microphone over there. If you want to come up, you can. Okay.
Well, I'm hoping not to get to that.
I mean, as far as I'm not sure exactly what we can do with that. What we're asking for here, what we're definitely asking for, especially with law enforcement, is to open Betty's case to us. Because it is considered closed, right? But they won't release the files to us. Because they want to say it's investigative material. But they won't say in what. Yeah. Do you want to? I hate putting other people's words in my mouth. I think it's good.
My mom was Laura, and I went to try to get the case open, and they wouldn't open it for me either. They wouldn't give me any information. And I grew up with my great-grandma. Her name's June, and I was always told that David Cantrell killed my grandmother, Kathleen. So I want this case solved for my grandmother that passed and didn't give an answer. I want an answer.
And I think mostly with that is if we can get the case files open, get this solved, maybe put David on account, right? It brings validation to what happened to your grandmother, right?
Yes.
So, and I think that's what you're asking for. So, again, to law enforcement, I mean, they're not doing anything with the files, so let the public do something with it. Let us look into it. What is there to hide? I mean, even if it is investigative materials at this point, and they're trying to keep something secret, most of these people are gone.
That's what I don't
I mean,
understand.
that's,
David's gone.
yeah.
David's gone.
I mean, you can't try somebody that's not here. You
Yeah.
can't, even witnesses and all, most of them are gone.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part of this.
I just feel like I'm the last generation of that story being told to me, constantly, that I would like it solved, and I would really like to hear that David was the guilty man.
Right. And I mean, unless we can put them on the hook and get those files or see, because I think, like with Gretchen and I, even in doing the podcast, the one thing that we were always looking to in with David is they rolled him out the morning she would just disappear before her body was even discovered. He's rolled out. He's never looked at again. Why is that? It's not on record. Well, it's not a record that we can see, but why is that?
I don't understand that either, because David sexually assaulted my mom the whole time that she was with him, constantly. So she had to go to court. She kept running away and running away, trying to get away from him. So why? I lost my train of thought. But why?
But why is that not enough?
Exactly.
Why is that not
I know
enough to
that
say
there was-
maybe he's involved?
I know that there was court cases, because my mom had to go to court, and she had to talk to the judge, and she told the judge. She told that judge what I did. And that judge asked David, and David was like, no, I didn't do that. And the judge was like, I believe what
you're
you're saying,
saying,
and he got away with it. But then when they got outside the courtroom, and Betty started to believe my mom, started to see the signs, and that's when Betty took my mom back in the courthouse and told the judge to get hold of
Right.
my great-grandma to send her back to Kingston.
That's right, and I appreciate you saying it. I know that's so hard because even when we were telling your mother's story, it's so hard for us, so we didn't want to say it like verbatim because it's not really ours to say like that.
And mom doesn't want to be acknowledged. What she was really hurt about, what hurt her the most, is that David didn't recognize her as one of his kids. She went to school here in Iowa, and David didn't recognize her as a kid.
Right.
But, you know, not that she wouldn't want to be recognized as David's kid, but the fact that you guys had to fight so much to get my mom's story just kind of blew her away a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and we just appreciate her taking the time. I mean, that's not easy to say. I mean, you say
It's
it
not.
here is not.
It's not
And
easy
so
for
when
any
we
of
say,
us to
like,
look
when we
at.
say that we're a victim-based podcast, this is what we're talking about. This isn't about David. This is about your mom, your grandmother, getting that information out in the right platform. That it's just done correctly, I guess.
Thank you.
Get that to work.
Sorry about that. We were so excited to get here, I forgot to save the newest copy to the flash drive.
Where would you go if your loved one was lost? Who would you turn to when law enforcement has come up empty in their efforts? When Don Sager disappeared in 1984, his family was shattered. Did he simply just walk away? Was he leading a double life? Or did something sinister happen that dreadful morning? As his family would begin to search for him, some would look into the isolated fields.
Fired. Firing you.
Where would you go if your loved one was lost? Who would you turn to when law enforcement has come up empty in their efforts? When Don Sager disappeared in 1984, his family was shattered. Did he simply just walk away? Was he leading a double life? Or did something sinister happen that dreadful morning? As his family would begin to search for him, some would look into the isolated fields and abandoned wells. Others would turn to the spirit world for guidance, while many believe that a lover squirrel held the secret to what happened in the shadows of the windmills. Listen to Bodies in the Bayous presents Season 5, Shadows of the Windmills, the disappearance of Don Sager.
When we first were contacted by Pam to take a look at this case, we really thought this would be one episode, and we would put it out there in order to try to get some information. We quickly found that this case needed more attention, and so we decided that this would be our next season. So occasionally friends of ours will joke about how maybe we should rename the podcast the Southeast Kansas Bodies in the Bayous podcast. We really feel like this family needs some advocacy to see what can happen and that this community can really help. We are still looking for any information in any of these cases. So this is our email address. You can contact us there at any point in time, or you can contact us in Facebook Messenger.
And many of you have our phone numbers, so you can contact us that way as well. It's not gone.
Are there any more questions tonight?
You mentioned that two of the cases had the same attorney. I don't know if you meant the defense attorney or the prosecuting. Can you name those people?
I believe actually both are the same. I think Busby is the prosecutor, and on the defense attorney side, I feel like I'm going to mess this up, but it's Talkington.
Yeah.
Talkington is on the defense attorney side.
When you mentioned the first name, I think you said Bussy or something. Would it have been Mitchell Bushy?
Oh, Bushy, yeah.
Mitchell, okay.
Mitchell Bushy.
And then who was the presiding judge? Was it the same for both cases?
That I do not believe is the same for both cases, but I don't recall who the presiding judge was. There were several different judges with Shoemaker over the course, because it took a couple of years for him to come to trial. He went in and out of the mental institution, which really delayed that trial.
They did lobotomy on her baby, didn't they?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
You said he thought they did a lobotomy on Herbert Eden?
My mom went to school with Herb Aiden, who was involved with Kenny White, and I don't know how they ended up doing it, because they said he lost lobotomy for a while. And lobotomies were real big back then.
Right.
And I always heard he got a lobotomy, and he ended up spending the rest of his life in a nursing home.
Well, he is back in Iola and starts up criminal activity in 1970. I have tried to track down exactly when he was released and have requested that information on multiple occasions, because we know that he went in at the very beginning of 1969 for the grand larceny charge and was given no more than 5 years. We're just unsure at how much time exactly he did spend.
Do you recall what profession Mr. Whiten was in?
He owned the sports center.
Oh, he was the owner of the sports center.
Yeah, he was the owner of the sports center.
Thank you.
He was carrying a large amount of cash with him that day. He was
Because he was gonna go Christmas shopping.
Christmas shopping, yeah.
To the mob?
Like some kind of underground.
So, actually, funny that you asked that. So when I'm actually sitting interviewing Roxanne, right? When I asked you, I was like, "Do you think there's like drug connections here? Are there gangs?" You didn't seem to think that there was. But there's not really that kind of connection.
Some kind of money laundering or something.
Maybe, but it's just you don't see that activity. You would see more of that kind of activity happening within the community, more like petty crimes, right? You just don't really see all that going on. I mean, not that we could tell from the articles, but we had to do a lot of research just to make sure that these cases weren't connected to something outside of even just this county.
So we talked about now the money laundering.
I'm not good with sign language. Hi.
He's trying to tell me we have plenty of time. No, he's trying to kick us out, I think.
He did.
So David was married a total of 4 times. His first wife is Kathleen, and we talked about her tonight. And we go into Kathleen a lot more on the podcast. But then his second wife is Betty. His third wife's name is actually escaping me, but his third wife apparently died of cancer. So he's a 3-time widower. He does marry a 4th time. His 4th wife lives with him for a couple of years and then returns to Iola, where she lives for a while independently, and he dies in Arkansas. He had a very tragic history.
That's possible, but I'm pretty sure the military would keep those records really close to their vest. That's probably not going to be something that's necessarily ran in newspapers, you know. So, I mean, we could definitely do some looking into that, but not that we could see.
In the way back there with the white pants and the black shirt, did you have a question, ma'am?
Well, I think that if you remember when he married his 3rd wife, he married her during the week of Betty's trial with Shoemaker.
Oh, yes.
Which
He married her the day after he testified in the trial for Betty.
Right.
But David was not a suspect in this case. Ever.
From day, no, not even day, like hour 2.
Actually, there's a nice quote in an old time True West magazine or True Detective magazine where it says David Cantrell was not a suspect in his wife's marriage, in his wife's disappearance. David was a good man.
Good.
Sally Hutton supposedly maybe babysit for them? Is that a rumor? Yes.
So the difficulty with the Sally Hutton and the babysitting. So it does come out that Sally Hutton will possibly babysat for the Cantrells. The problem was we could never come across anyone who said it at the time of her death. It would come across years later where her mother had said, you know, I think she babysat for the Cantrells, but we couldn't get any information that early on to confirm that. And although I think it's a very good possibility, her uncle lived directly across the street and from the Cantrells, and so she was over at their house quite often. So I think it is a possibility, at least that she knew them pretty well.
I'm Rita Sanders, and I'm the one that called the police on the drunk, Jack Shoemaker. But he came to my door, and of course I could tell he was drunk, so he wanted to use the phone. And I just went ahead and I told him to go on, and I went and called the police. But I heard the next day he had confessed to the Betty Cantrell murder. But I had no one, no police, no authorities, KBI, nothing, ever came and talked to me. Like if I would have had any information, which I really didn't. He didn't say anything. He just was like they drinking or drunk, and that's all. But I felt like someone would come and talk to me just to find out something, or maybe if I knew anything, which I didn't. But I just was surprised that no one ever tried to find out anything. That's all.
Well, I don't find that surprising, unfortunately, because we can't find anybody, or nobody ever came forward to even say they were questioned from any restaurants that serve burger and fries in Sally's case. So it just seems like they didn't really do a lot of door-to-door knocking, following up, interviews, if they're out there. But obviously that didn't happen for you, and you're making this phone call, right? They're not sharing that. And even if it's a misstep at this point, it's just, like, we have to move past that and see what can be done. We have to start at ground zero. You're still here. You can still give a statement. At the very least, it just doesn't make sense. That's what is so frustrating to me. You have anything to add there?
No, I think, that is kind of one of the hard things, is that your witnesses are certainly aging. When we talk about Laura and her story, she's getting much older. When we talk about people who have just recently come forward to say that Betty was being abused by David, these are people who are passing away. When you look at Carolyn, that is another concern. How much longer can we wait before there isn't family left who remembers? And in the Dawn Sager case, their family has waited for years to try to find something out about what has gone on.
When did David die?
Put me on the spot there.
I don't know.
Hold on just a second. I got my clicker.
Just to piggyback kind of on what you were saying there for a second, is
The family tree.
you gotta let it.
Yeah, there you go. 1995. 2 days after we left, he was headed down to Kansas City, I believe, and he was going to take it with him.
So have you heard any more?
We have not, but that's only been since March. Unfortunately, with this kind of stuff, it could take a while. We've not heard back.
Gretchen, you had a hand up over there.
Go ahead, Mary.
Hi. I don't think the microphone can reach there. Maybe you can take the box.
We can just kind of.
My name, I am Jean Moore. I am Betty Cantrell's sister. Hi, nice to meet you. I was here visiting in August, before October. My sister told me that she was going to divorce Dave. And I knew something was wrong, but she didn't tell me.
We're very sorry for your loss. We are.
Did she disclose maybe anything else to you at that time that could, if we can get the case to maybe be reopened, that might be helpful?
I didn't.
Is there anything that she might have disclosed to you during that time that if we could get the cases to maybe be reopened or looked at?
She just told me that she was going to divorce him. She didn't tell me why. But I knew something
Did she
had
tell
to be
you
wrong.
Did she tell you if Sally babysat for her?
Like,
Do you know if Sally Hutton babysat for?
I think so, yes. Mm-hmm, yeah.
Brenda Hutton just died.
I was under the impression that Sally did babysit, yes. And I do
Ma'am, you
believe
said
there
that
is
she
a-
did babysit for him? You said that Sally did babysit for David? You said that Sally did babysit for David?
Oh, no.
I'm just checking.
I think Curtis would like everybody to go have some cookies. I think he's worried that you'll have to take them to go.
He would never kick you off the stage, Gretchen.
Nobody will kick me off the stage.
Okay, so in the one where he's talking about suspects of Sally's, I mean, clearly there were people that's like, I know who you're talking about. Have you had anybody come forward that, yeah, maybe I agree with that, or any kickback? Because you gotta know that they realize if they listen that, well, they're talking about me. So I just wondered if anybody's, like, come forward.
So we've not had anybody come forward saying otherwise.
So you're asking us if we've ever had any negative attention?
No, not negative, but somebody come to you and say, you know, I wondered
I
if
heard
they
that
did
you
it.
put me out there.
Or but maybe if those people were like, whoa, it wasn't me. If they recognize that, hey, they're talking about me.
No, the only thing that we've had happen, honestly, is more people coming forward and validating the suspicion.
Okay.
So I know you don't have the case files, but do you know of suspects, people that were interviewed in Sally's case, who was looked out? You know, was David, were family members, were other people questioned?
Well, David definitely was not.
David was never a suspect in either his wife's disappearance, murder, or Sally's case, ever. And police were adamant about that one. In Sally's case, there were a large number of people who were interviewed. And, you know, I mean, I don't have exact numbers because we certainly weren't given the case file, but we did talk to Tom Williams, and he did give us an idea of how many they actually went and talked to. And from that, we can pretty much surmise that with Glenda's letter, that the individual that she's talking about in that letter was talked to. But we also know that a large number of men who were probably, or boys that were probably about the right age, pretty much a lot of them coming from the class of 1969. I'm not pointing any fingers, but a lot of students from that particular class were certainly on that list.
And on that list too, because one of the descriptive sort of identifying characteristics that were given by the set of sisters was a tall, slender, red-headed man or boy. So.
Anybody who they could identify as driving similar type vehicles to that was certainly questioned as much as they could at the time. So I do think that they had a large amount of people that they did question, but clearly
Tom Williams really narrowed that down to, this would be nice to say like 4 people.
he had 4 people that were pretty much his
it might have been a little smaller than that.
And I can guarantee you from him, he pretty much told us that David Cantrell was never one of his suspects either. Which
and there was one that was suspected of
Sally's.
And you guys can hear all of this on the podcast too. It's just maybe not the platform to do it right here, but there was somebody on his suspect list that was actually in prison, and he went and did interviews extensively with that person, and didn't rule him out.
Was David ever a suspect in his first wife's murder?
Well, yes, I mean
from his family, I think,
but I don't think any investigation was ever done into her actual.
I have tried to get her death certificate, and really we're actually still kind of waiting on that. Apparently, that document might take years to come.
Might be lost.
Lost. And so, because I wanted to know what her cause of death was ruled as, to kind of bring that from the what? Pneumonia. Okay. In the back.
Could it be one reason that people didn't, you can't validate what they said at the time, but because they're living in fear in a small community and where they had a hunch of who did it, they didn't want to be the next victim? Mm-hmm. David Cantrell lived in 1995. That's a long time to be oppressed.
Mm-hmm. And we definitely had quite a few people who came forward on both of these cases who said to us, we'll give you this information, but please don't use my name or who I am, because they did live in some fear that there would be some retribution from the community possibly, or they didn't want friends or family members to know that they had come forward. So it wasn't something that we didn't hear.
But the other thing that we heard a lot too was when we're asking questions, or like when we do the timeline, we start calling, cold calling, messaging. When we're like, how come you didn't come forward at the time? It simply, again, goes back to that statement of, I was never asked, I was never interviewed. And that is basic policing.
Any more questions before Curtis blows a gasket over here?
Well, obviously, for the non-Sager case, are you running into any roadblocks with that?
Oh yeah, we're sure running into some roadblocks on the Don Sager case. So the Don Sager case is a currently open case, open missing persons case, but the Allen County Sheriff's Department has lost the case file.
And that we found out for certain in March of this year.
So if I have an incident at my home, I will never see the Allen County Sheriff's Department come respond to a call I've made?
Possibly not, but they lose the file anyway.
Not when there's somebody from Texas parked in your driveway.
True.
No. Hey, things happen.
Things happen, but make it right. Like, start from this point forward. And not to mention, when we left that interview with Brian Murphy, Don Sager is the reason we were there. We're giving him the case file, just the little bit that we do have given to us from his family.
Well, I've made everybody a promise, and this is my promise. If anybody in any law enforcement agency moves forward and solves any of these cases, I will apologize for anything bad that I have said at any point in time. But then move forward. That's all I'm asking. Absolutely, the one thing that I am asking is just move these cases forward. Allen County has a total.
Let's say it all together, guys. How many?
Of 2 cold cases.
2.
Sally Hutton and Don Sager. The Iola Police Department has a total of only 1. Kenneth Paul White. Move forward. That's all we want. We're the out-of-town podcasters. We leave. We just want them to move these cases forward and give these families some answers. They deserve it. They absolutely deserve it. The bravery of coming here tonight and standing here and telling their story is amazing. And you guys all deserve a round of applause, and I want to thank you so much for doing that.
Sir, you have a question in the back.
As citizens, how can we get them to open the talk?
Pressure.
Pressure. After tonight's performance, every single one of you is welcome to write a letter to the Iola Register.
And we'll put it, we have the Justice for Sally Hutton Facebook page. We put it out there. We will definitely tag it, bring it back up to the current reels or feed. But you know, you've been helping us with extensive with that. But yeah, we write them all the time, so.
Hold your law enforcement accountable. Say to them that 55 years and 40 years is too long. It is time to move forward. And what we said was this. You can take 1 police officer, 1 sheriff's officer, and assign them to these cases and say to them, spend 3 hours a week on this case. Because that's the amount of time that we spend on this podcast. And I'm not getting paid. Please take some cookies.
Please don't forget to sign in on, where's our book at now, Gertrude?
Around the corner.
Sign in for us around the corner so we can get you on our email list. We can send you that information on where to write. It's official.